Our correspondent Said Pureza joins us from London to give us the latest on this. Rodney Shakespeare, professor of binary economics, also joins us from London for an analysis. Welcome to you both. Said Pureza, first over to you. We're looking at these barristers in the justice system of the UK. So this is, I'm guessing, very important in terms of the strike. Tell us why they've decided to do this at this point, and the depth of how this strike is going to affect the justice system, and as we just read in the news, or I just read in the news, that is there a possibility of the justice system breaking down because of this?
It's very difficult to predict that, Kaveh, but what is clear is that this is part of what is referred to as the UK Summer of Unrest, a series of protests that are going to be staged and have been staged by people in different sectors. We have seen over the past couple of weeks protests staged by railway workers, the underground workers, causing massive disruptions to the transportation system, followed now by these barristers, people in the criminal justice system, to be followed in the coming weeks and months by people in other industrial sectors, such as teachers as well as nurses, people working for the NHS, the National Health Service. The reason for all of this, it should be sought soaring cost of living, or the cost of living crisis in this country. Wages are not going up in tandem with the rising rate of inflation, and so these people are out on the streets demanding a pay rise, barristers included. There are, as we all heard yesterday, then all over the media, they're underpaid and they cannot really pay for their daily expenses. And you're looking at an inflation rate that has already gone up to a little over 9%, expected to exceed 10% in the coming months, of course, spread unevenly among the rich and poor. The rich, for example, experiencing a little over 8% of inflation, whereas the poor are experiencing just under 11% of it already, and that's only June. Things are going to get much worse come October. Already, for example, you're looking at fully employed nurses having to rely on food banks to make ends meet, to be able to put food on their table. And also, you're looking at people in other parts of the economy having to handle their expenses on a monthly basis. You're looking at prices, for example, increasing across the board. The reason, of course, should be sought in a few things. For example, Brexit is a major contributor. The disruptions to supplies as a result of the UK leaving the European Union. Add to that the post-pandemic economy, the global market forces that are inevitable, obviously, and then the ongoing military conflict in Ukraine that has sent food prices up. The Ukraine and Russia being major producers of grains. Add to that, for example, the decision to ban grains by India to protect national supplies. All of those things have contributed to the growing rise in the cost of living here in the UK. Of course, other EU economies dealing with the same thing, and globally as well. So as to why, again, these solicitors, barristers rather, are out there up in arms asking for their wages to be increased, it should be sought in the cost of living.
Okay, Rodney Shakespeare, just while Said was talking there, I figure I'd brush up on my knowledge of what the latest inflation rate is for the UK, and I'm looking at not the 9%, but rather what Bloomberg says, closing in on the double-digit inflation. Obviously, people there in the UK, especially government employees, are concerned. Can the government handle this? And you're looking at an influx that is spreading across sectors in terms of the types of demands that they have.
11%, but if you are poor, that's 11% of just the things that you have to have, like food. And no one is now believing 11%, 15 is much more likely. But the key point about the barristers going on strike is that they are the professional middle classes going on strike. And whenever you have a really serious political struggles, they never get anywhere until the elements of the middle classes get involved. And that is now going on, not just in the UK, but elsewhere. Right the way around the world, the stresses are building. A good example is a meeting of countries in North and South America, where 5 countries refused to attend because 3 had been banned. In other words, they were defying America. And that sort of standing up at the same time as Colombia, a right-wing country, changes and goes left. These are signs that the inflation and the stresses is going right the way around the world. And they, at the moment, they're making it worse. There are some obvious things to do, but they are bullheaded. They are on a train which is going forward. They have no means of stopping themselves. They go forward and they make the situation worse.
Okay, let's listen to some online posts on this in our social media segment, and we'll get right back to the conversation. Our first post. Philanthropists. The UK is heading for a major recession, hyperinflation, and stagflation, yet we continue to send multi-millions unchecked and lethal aid to Ukraine, under attack by our own government. Next, train workers, post office workers, and now doctors are demanding action from the Tory government to address their concerns. Withholding pay raise is not going to work with all-time high inflation. Wondering if the quality of life for an average person in the UK to be back to what it was? Next, since 2010, rent has risen by 42% in Edinburgh, 41% in Glasgow. Between 2010 and 2018, pay in UK fell by around 3% in real terms. You can't ask workers to be realistic in the face of inflation whilst turning a blind eye to landlords raking it in. And our final post, the winter wasteland is coming. Recession coupled with inflation will devastate all of the UK, but the hardest part of it to take in Scotland is the fact that Scotland is not responsible for any of it, with the exception of failing to get out of it in 2014. Okay, those were some of the online posts. I guess if I'm going to come to you, Saeed, I'd like to find out what's happening on the ground there. I mean, we know that we are witnessing protests erupting in Europe. For example, the one in Brussels, I think, was quite big. You had about 80,000 people that came out. Are we looking at a sentiment running throughout the UK population at this point, given the fact that the rising cost of living is so high, that the outburst is going to happen in the form of protest?
It depends on which side you're on, Kaveh. Those who are in the opposition to the government, yes, they can't wait to get rid of it. I talked to a few, as a matter of fact, over the weekend, saying that they can't wait for the next election, for the next chance to vote this government out of power. And it's easy to say why. Well, since they came to power, the economy seems to be going from bad to worse. Again, they cut them some slack at the outset, since they would have tried to make people believe that this was all a result of the pandemic that shut down the economy. But now people are, there's more to it than what the government would have them believe. And they really made that clear in the recent by-elections, didn't they, when they voted either for Labour or for the Liberal Democrats. For example, in the case of one constituency, it voted Conservative Tory for a century, voted Liberal Democrat. That's the level of anger you're seeing among supporters even of the Conservative Party and of this government, people who voted for Brexit even, now realizing that the government is not governing the way they would have expected them to. So come next election, we're going to see some major changes. Of course, we have seen some vote-getting measures introduced by this government. For example, that huge windfall tax on multinational energy corporations, which they resisted for a long time, but pushed by opposition economists that would be at least a short-term solution to the crisis that the nation is experiencing. But then people expect more, and it seems to me that we're going to see more anger on the part of the British public against this government in the coming months, especially as we're expecting another 50% rise in the energy costs. And the government handout of a few £100, of course, different amounts to different households and different people, is not really going to turn people's attention from the fact that the government doesn't seem to be having a plan in turn, trying to shop.
That's it. Yeah, that's a great point that you make. Sorry, you were cutting on and off too. I didn't mean to jump in there. But Rodney Shakespeare, our correspondent, Syed Purza, talks about a very important point here, and that's the government's handling of finances, the policies, whether that could be done better in terms of the way that it's allocating budgets or funding. And of course, I'd like to get in a viewer comment here when they said that a few hundred or millions of pounds going to the war in Ukraine. I read right here that it's 1.3 billion pounds that has gone to Ukraine. So if you can put those 2 points into one answer for us.
The Ukraine is perhaps at the center of this colossal inflation. And the sanctions on Russia have boomeranged, and the Russian ruble is now stronger than it was before the invasion. But the key thing is the oil price. And they're doing nothing to cut the price of oil in half. And they can do that by making an agreement with Iran, which would require that they lift all sanctions and pay compensation, billions of dollars, for the damage they have caused, and pay compensation to the family of General Qasem Soleimani and make an apology. And unless they do that, Iran is not going to trust them. And unless Iran trusts the USA, there ain't going to be a halving of the price of oil. So they can do things. But in fact, they're making the situation worse every single day. I won't go into what they did yesterday. They're just making it worse.
Well, go ahead. Tell us. You got about a few seconds. Go ahead.
Well, it's a stupid example, but they banned Russia selling gold, and the effect will be to put more gold into Russia and enable Russia to sell at a higher price to other countries like Turkey, India, and China. Everything they do is completely incompetent and making the situation worse. And there's a solution for Ukraine, but they aren't going to go do it.
All right, very well. We'll leave it there. Thank you very much for that. That's Rodney Shakespeare, Professor of Binary Economics from London, and also from London. Thank you very much for your good points there. Syed Purza, who spoke to us, also from London. With that, we come to an end for this edition of the News Review. Thanks for tuning in.